thanks to all of you. This is the New Business Tools 2016 Annual Report. The very official sounding title is a review of the most important tools your agency should be using for new business. This is our fourth year. A little bit of housekeeping. If you do have questions and love it, we already had one out of the gate, feel free to shoot them over. I do want to keep us on track and on time, though. So if it's something that maybe is not going to lend itself to a quick answer, I will absolutely answer you today. And I appreciate it, but do feel free to please throw out any questions. If you want to tweet during this, hashtag is hashtag RSWUS. And last, I really appreciate you all giving me your time at what is lunch hour for a lot of you, but regardless, you're giving me part of your busy business day. I appreciate it. We will keep this to 45 minutes at the longest. And the main goal is not to be boring. There are other main goals, but hopefully we at least get that going for you. I'm Lee McKnight Jr. I'm the VP of Sales here at RSW US. This will not be a commercial for RSW. This will be pretty much the only plug, I think. But quickly, if you don't know us, we are an outsourced new business development group. We only work with marketing services firms and agencies. Two main goals that we have. One is to get you in front of decision makers at right fit companies with good qualified meetings. But what we realized several years ago now in our 10 plus years, and I've been here for 8.5 of those, is we need to do more for our agency clients. So our main goal is how do we get you closer to actually closing that business? If for any reason you'd like to know more about us, shoot me an email. I'll put that up here later. Enough about us, though. We had over 200 agency respondents nationwide from our database, RSW's, and Mirren database. If you are not familiar with Mirren, I'm going to assume probably most of you are, but they are a new business consultancy headed up by Brett Hodgins. They do a great job, and not only in that consulting portion, but they every year have in New York City, have a new business conference that really is good and worth your time if you've never been. One of the things I've heard on occasion is that, it's really aimed at agencies that are so much bigger than us. And I'll tell you, that's typically not true. They try to do a good job of a mix. And we release this report every year through that conference. They switched venues this time. They typically were near Wall Street, but they're more towards Hell's Kitchen in the city, and love the new space. So if you have not yet been to that conference, I would suggest you at least check it out. Mirren, you're welcome for that plug. You can download this at no cost. That is this report that I'll be pulling everything from today. And we'll be posting it so you can get it anytime on our site, RSW US. We'll be posting on Monday, more than likely, possibly tomorrow. But go to rswus.com, go to the resources tab at the top right. The survey dropdown is where you can get this. So a few quick things about who took this survey and where this report came from. We had small, mid-size, and large agencies, all represented across the over 200 respondents this year, fairly consistent with the distribution of agencies nationally as well. In terms of who took it, most senior agency roles were typical CEO, president, partner, principal, most likely to respond, which is great to see. But also had plenty of new agency, new business type of titles, new business directors answer as well, which we're consistently pleased with that as well. So a little bit of upfront. What I want to do here is if you've already downloaded the report, this is not meant to be a rehash and me just rotely explaining who came in first, second, and third. There's going to be a little bit of that. And if you haven't downloaded, well, this will be new to you. But if you have, I just want to make sure there's going to be more to this webinar than just what's in the report. So let's jump. This is interesting. We asked agencies to identify the 3 most essential tools as the first question in the report for driving new business growth. Now, before we go to those responses, you may have seen this infographic, if that's the right way, this chart, what have you, over the years. Really consider how difficult this question has become in 2016. In 2011, I know it's obviously tough to see these brand logos here during this webinar, but in 2011, it's chiefmartech.com. I'm probably saying it incorrectly, but it's chiefmartech.com published this infographic in 2011 of the marketing technology landscape. Crazy that 150 companies in 11, and now fast forward to not very many years ahead, we now have 3,874 companies in 2016. Not that you can see much better with this, but this is the 2016 version, which is just crazy. And certainly, look, not all of these 3,000 plus, firms or companies are going to be something that you should explore for a new business. But I pointed out, not only to point out how difficult just that question becomes these days, but also to let you all know, with each year of this survey, we do look and welcome, by the way, anyone to send us companies that might not have been in our survey, to date. So Before we get into specific data, I want to look at the tools agencies indicated are most crucial to growing their new business currently. And we'll do that a bit quicker, again, just for those of you maybe who have already downloaded. But new business tool cited most frequently as being crucial to new business is Salesforce, nearly 20% of respondents identifying that. LinkedIn, close second with 18% identifying it as essential for new business. And then Winmo, a new one for us this year, and new because time last year, I do not believe they were around yet officially. So that was interesting to see someone new coming in. That comes from the folks at the List and Catapult you may be familiar with. So 13% indicate there. So in terms of new tool acquisition, in 16, we asked survey participants specifically if they had added any new business tools. Was really happy to see the answer was 70% indicating they did. I mean, to understand how tough new business is, period, for agencies. For that many agencies to have at least devote whatever time they did to say and think about a new tool that we need to add to our roster, to our stable, is great to see. And then in terms of what those tools were, 25% mentioning that for them this year it was Winmo and HubSpot. So about ideal new business tool. I'm excited about this. Number one, just because, and I think before, but whatever this tool is on your screen, I want. But as in our prior surveys, we asked agency executives to describe that ideal new business tool. Now, what I hope you'll like about the next few slides, I'm going to read you some verbatim quotes directly from your peers. I see it says audio is a bit choppy. Okay. Thank you for telling me. Let's switch. Still choppy? Hello, testing, better. Okay, I will let me know. I can switch to the phone. So similar to 2015, a tool to better integrate in terms of, well, let me take a step back. Cool, okay. I'm more, yes, it's choppy, yes, it's not choppy. So I'll keep going, but I'll be watching messages. So similar to last year's report, agencies expressed almost like a match.com, for agencies. Okay, let me see here. So we're not getting, let me just see if I, all right. This continues, we'll have to, I'm sorry about that. I have no idea why. How about now? We hearing me now? Am I inside a McDonald's drive-through? Yes, you caught me. Okay, so I think this might be it. So what we looked at was, in terms of new mentions, folks wanting and providing predictive targeting, almost like a match.com is what I was just mentioning. And then a quoting tool that would span the process of quoting more effectively through invoicing. And then a few more, and again, these are all verbatim tools, around the idea of better integration of data. Respondents were asking for a tool that brings everything together under one roof. So when I go to call a prospect, I have immediate access to all their contact info, history of emails and calls, bio info, notes, all in one screen. Now, I thought that was interesting because there are those tools out there already, and we'll get to that in a second. But they also mentioned integration and operations, connecting activity with social and .com environment. I mean, these are all completely valid. A few more with regard to better tracking. Respondents would like to see sales process tracking that is cleaner and more shareable, and increased knowledge in tracking leads. And then when considering improved reporting tools, agency execs suggested these ideas, better reporting and automated follow-up, data that would allow us to target prospects in more customized ways. And then lastly, in terms of just those open-ended comments, excuse me here, they're looking for a simpler, more practical CRM. So they're looking at CRM full integration. They're looking at ease of use. And then finally, a better way to integrate multiple platforms like Salesforce, LinkedIn, and MailChimp, for example. But I do want to point out one thing. This was a title of a post I wrote, 2 weeks ago. There will never be a perfect CRM for agency new business, so stop waiting for it. And by God, I stand by that. In all seriousness, I mean, it's agencies do use tools like this as an excuse often. That's the hard truth, people. But it really is true. I think a lot of times, and some reasons very valid, that a tool like and HubSpot, I love you, but you do get called out on this a lot, even though I think there have been a lot of strides there. That look, there's too much horsepower. I'm overwhelmed, and while valid, I think what agencies need to do is, you need something like, for example, a CRM in this case. And you could say this about several new business tools. What you've got to do is do your homework, obviously. There are several, and there are several new tools, CRMs specifically, and they're listening to not only other clients, but agency clients. And they are simplifying the process. Even some of those may have more horsepower than you need. But what you've got to do is commit to it. Find one person in the agency that can spend some time with it, and then pick and choose those pieces that you need, and the rest set aside. You don't need to use that robustness of suite. And most of them have it set up so that you don't have to. I mean, for a fact, and we'll get into this, but here's what I need with the CRM. I need to be able to put all the information in, find it quickly, be able to access things like LinkedIn that are keyed into the page on the prospect I'm looking at, and that I can then track that individual. I mean, that's the essence of what you need, for your new business. Those tools do exist now. You just got to commit. I will now get off the soapbox. So in terms of goals moving forward for this webinar, in terms of the rest of it, obviously want you to get some valuable feedback here, and going to talk about what tools your agency peers are using and why, how has usage changed year to year, what new tools might benefit your efforts, and then if resources are limited, what are the top 3 tools that we would recommend. So let's look at categories and insights. From here, we're going to get into each of the categories of new business tools included in the survey. Going to talk about the following. So here's 1 through 11, all the categories, and this is in order of usage. So social media being at the top. Certainly, if you already have the report or you're going to download it, I'm not going to go through all these right here. You see them on the screen, though. We did have a new one this year, and that was the 3rd most used, and that's the content and development tools. So let's talk a bit about social media tools earning top spots for the 3rd year in a row. We have social, which this year seems to, as you can see there, plateaued a bit. I mean, we have 93%. Again, I mean, large percentage, obviously, but only 2 categories posted growth. A slight increase in the number of respondents indicating they use list building software, and then a large increase in the number using content development tools. So with our 2016 survey, we took a deeper look at the effectiveness of individual tools. Now, in past surveys, respondents rated overall categories and their effectiveness in supporting new business. Now, this year, we have greater feedback about each named service and/or platform. So I'm going to be sharing which tools agencies are finding most effective, and which of those aren't meeting expectations. So what we're going to do is focus predominantly on these 4. If you can see those, I'm in orange. And the reason we're doing that is the responses presented really some notable observations. Now, we're going to talk about each of the others in brief. But with social media, it was top rated for the 4th year. We've got content development tools, which were new and are increasingly vital to new business. And then CRM contact, list building software, all which created this year some interesting topics to talk about in this webinar. We have social media, number 1, 93%. The reigning tool for new business. Top 3 tools, not going to be a shock to you, or excuse me, as I'm jumping around on my page there. In terms of this slide, we called out social media tools as through those 4 years, as I said, been the top in the category. And you can see there, as I mentioned, kind of that potential plateau. Then in terms of top 3 social media tools, you can see there LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. The stalwarts is what I'm going to call them. But in terms of usage comparison, here's where it gets interesting. Twitter dropped 5 points with 83% indicating they used it versus 88 and 15. Now, Instagram has leapfrogged over YouTube and Google+, 72% in 2016 versus 48% last year. I mean, that's a huge jump. And we see, a lot of growth among social platforms that have significant visual and/or video components. Not a huge surprise, given that that's the way it's trending just with usage across social media, period, whether it's new business, or not. But also not as surprising, given the visual nature of so many agencies, obviously, especially, creative agencies. It's a great way to showcase work But want to talk a little bit about that. If we build on a question we asked first in 2015 about how they use social media tools, brand awareness leads again, and that's a good thing. I mean, 90% of respondents indicating that's a key objective, as it should be, part of new business, as I hope you know. It's not always about that sell, right? It's also about the thought leadership, about the ongoing brand awareness, not only to fill your pipeline, but keep you in front of those prospects who you know are busy and eventually will, after so many of those touches that have some good value to them, will ultimately want to talk to you. But that awareness, that's good to see that high number. PR, another objective posted, 69% citing it. That is a reason to use social for new business versus 57 in 2015. What's interesting here, though, is lead generation suffered a considerable fall off as an objective, only 54% citing it in 2016 versus 67% last year. So a little bit on that fall off. And I think in terms of that fall off, it's tough to measure in some of those cases, right? It's different than going through your CRM and your automation. But here are a couple of stats directly from this week that I wanted to add, for this webinar. This stat, almost 60% of links shared on Twitter are never opened. I don't know if that's shocking to you all or not. Maybe shocking is too strong a word. That seems like a high number to me. But ouch is what I'll say. What does that mean for new business for you all? I mean, we've talked about those social stalwarts, plateauing for the first time. Twitter usage still high at 83%, but dipping for the first time in 4 years for us. So, Twitter's probably not going anywhere for a while. Still potentially effective tool for new business, but keeping that 60% number in mind. Here's a takeaway for you. Here's a quote from that article, which is in the Drum, by the way, this week. People are more willing to share an article than read it. Typical of modern information consumption. People form an opinion based on a summary, or God forbid, my words, summary of summaries, without making the effort to go deeper. A summary of a summary. I mean, talk about reduced attention span. But that's part of new business, period. I mean, we all know how busy, well, you all are, but certainly your prospects are. So whether it's Twitter or an email subject line, it's never been more important for you to cut to the chase when you're pursuing prospects. I mean, up front, at least, you've got to be concise, differentiating, and whether that's inbound or outbound communication. When you're talking about things like summary of summaries, I mean, it just, you've got to be on top of your positioning in terms of being as concise as possible. I have no idea why I use this slide, because it has nothing to do with B2B or social media, but first of all, it just disgusted me to think about that. And also, I don't know, I liked it. If there ever is Marlboro ice cream, well, that's probably when the apocalypse happens. But I digress. B2B, for you agencies who focus on here today, I mean, this is an interesting one for you. As you know, not a knock, but they are traditionally behind the curve on things like social. Looks like it's changing. This was another article from the Drum this week, but the consensus among key marketers in the B2B sector, they talk about 90% of enterprises saying they respond to customer service inquiries on social. 54% of B2B marketers saying they're using social to generate leads. 72% saying that followers are likely to make a future purchase from the brand. Now, that's good news just for you B2B agencies with social chops, as part of your service, as part of your offering. But in terms of new business, it's also positive. I mean, it's not a direct correlation, I realize that, but with B2B marketers becoming savvier at social, odds are good. They're also using social more for their company, which means they're on the platform, period, and it opens up further avenues for you to connect with them. So as always, though, you don't want to spin your wheels. I mean, it's easy enough to find out if they're on, your prospect is on a particular social platform with a simple search. If they're not, you've got to think in the aggregate, is it smart for me to be putting X amount of time against a particular platform? Because maybe, obviously it's not. Another from this week is watching Snapchat for new business. Now, in our most recent tools report, Snapchat made its first appearance here in 2016. Now, it was rated second to last in usage, so it's not setting the world on fire. 47% of agencies reported using it for new business, so that's a decent number. However, it was rated last in effectiveness at 1.23 out of 5. So, Lee, why are you even talking about it? Well, per Fast Company, Snapchat claims its users quintupled, you may have seen this week, their video consumption between May 2015 and April 2016. It's 2 billion to 10 billion views daily. Obviously, we did not create the right thing for ourselves. We would all be millionaires and not in this webinar, but that's more than Facebook's latest reported total of 8 billion. And that's from last November. So couple that with the fact that 86% of Snapchat users are between the ages of 13 and 34. Now that means you should at the very least be monitoring Snapchat's new business potential. Now, I do mean monitor at this stage, because just like the B2B example I gave you, depending on what verticals your agency play in, prospecting via Snapchat, maybe not the best use of your time. But marketers are getting younger, right? And with Snapchat's age demographic being what it is, it's absolutely worth watching, if nothing else, as that continuing awareness piece. So again, you got to make sure your prospects are there, but odds are good that in the coming years, depending where Snapchat falls, could be something to watch and should be something to watch. Similarly here, and here's the last stat for social, and I'll wrap up. We'll get to the next tool, but Instagram doubles monthly users to 500 million in 2 years, and it sees 300 million daily. So that's a stat from a TechCrunch article, again, this week. Not too shabby for Facebook-owned Instagram, but it did come in 6th as the most used social tool for new business in our report. But it had an almost 30% jump in usage by agencies from last year. And all of those, you can see in our report, all of those visually defined visual type platforms, the Instagram, the Snapchats, the Tumblrs, all had 10, 20, even 30% jumps in usage by your agency peers. So, like Snapchat, worth exploring to see if your prospects are using it. But here's also an example from the article, about 2 paragraphs in, of being wary of the shiny new business objects. It was like social. When agencies first started using it several years ago for new business, they just jumped on every platform that was out there. 80% of Instagram users come from outside the US. That's up from 75% in September. So what does that mean? Well, if you're not prospecting internationally, that's something to keep in mind. It continues on in that don't spin your wheels category, but again, still worth checking out. So tool number 2, content development, 83% reported usage. And this is kind of interesting because we first surveyed that slide on the left, as you see, 2015, we first surveyed about content development tools last year. Usage was limited, but we really phrased the question differently this year. Last year, you and your peers were indicating content based around more video specifically. And so any tools that they talked about were leaned towards hardware, I should say, more like whether it was cameras or video editing software. So this year we presented it differently, and we were seeking to understand first, just how often they're using those tools, but also the extent to which content supporting new business was being created in-house. 83% said they did that. I love you all dearly, but I'm calling BS. I think that's not true, but I hope it is. In all honesty, I mean, we talk to so many agencies, and while so many of you and so many firms out there are doing so much of a better job, still a wide swath that maybe the 83%, of those 35% did one blog post last year. Now, and I'm not being overly, well, if I am being overly critical, I shouldn't, because Lord knows we know better than anyone doing our own content of minimally 2 blog posts a week on top of our reports and things of that nature, how hard it is to do that. But what I thought was interesting, number one, so you have these tools that were listed, and ultimately you have folks companies like Writer Access and Contently, who essentially, if you're not familiar with those, they have, and there's more to it than this, but I'll paraphrase. They have a set of thousands, in some cases, of freelance writers who have experience in certain categories, and you're able to outsource that function. What I find, and I keep saying it's interesting, so here is what I actually find interesting, other than the fact that we've got that larger percentage of agencies going out of house. What I heard, and I heard it at the Mirren New Business Conference, we had a panel that I moderated on, not on this report per se, but we took the categories from this report and talked a bit. If some of you were there, thank you for coming to that, by the way. But not only that report, but what I hear from agencies, it was similar to what we heard here at RSW years and years ago. How is someone from outside the agency going to be able to represent me? And in this case, write content for me? You've got to get over that, because I'm here to tell you that they can, and they can do it well. Now, of course, the caveats are this. Certainly, we're not going to pretend like a freelancer like that, or a company like Contently, just not to pick on them, but just to pull one out, is going to be able to understand the innate nature of your agency culture. No, absolutely not. I mean, in that sense, everyone's different, but that's not what your content needs to be about anyway, at least not the majority of it. Some of it, certainly, you want to make more personal and about you and have the human element. But when we're talking about thought leadership, and you all know this, I mean, you want to talk about how you're helping solve business challenges within each category for your client. And someone outside can do that. Now, Do you have to do your homework? Of course. And a lot of these companies that we mentioned are going to give you things like free trials and being able to understand what you're getting. So that's something you got to do homework for. And if it's a freelance writer, that someone that obviously maybe or that is within your network, within your city, or even outside, obviously that's someone who eventually you're going to come to know and trust, but you can see their writing. And so just point being, I thought it was, oh gosh, I'll just say it, a little bit hypocritical that a lot of these agencies say there's no way, but then they say the most effective tool they have are freelance writers. So, it is good to see though. And I'm just being a little catty now, but I'll move on. So for content development tools, remember the effectiveness of that tool depends on both its design, like we talked about, and the expertise of its users, as we talked about too. I mean, there's no silver bullets in agency new business. I know you don't like hearing that, and it gets a little tiresome to throw that cliche out, but it is true. And when it comes to content development, that's hard, right? And so it's got to be something where if you're going to invest in the tools, or a freelancer, be sure they provide some adequate training in the sense of you communicating with them what it is you're trying to get across, ultimately, within those categories. So tool 3, we have content management and CRM software. Reported usage there is 69%. Interesting to see. So ultimately, the expanded use of CRM platforms from 13 to 15 has been consistent. In 13, the category ranked 7th. Since then, it's risen to 3rd. Nice to see there. And then from 15 to 16, though, it does seem to have plateaued slightly, just a percentage point drop. Nothing to be too crazy scared of if you're a Salesforce here, for example, being number 1. We got Salesforce, HubSpot, and then, oh yeah, Excel coming in at number 3. We'll talk about that again, but let's look at effectiveness. I mean, Salesforce and HubSpot neck and neck in effectiveness ratings, both scoring slightly above the average on a 5-point scale, where 5 is highly effective. And, if I'm either one of those, you got to shake your head when you see Excel at 2.8. I mean, Excel is not a CRM, right? We all know that. And we talked about this in the panel there at Mirren, and we've talked about it before. If you're not familiar with our tools report over the past several years, in the first year, we did not list Excel because again, not a CRM. However, we got so many write-ins. I mean, as a write-in, I think Excel came in like 3rd that year. Since then, Excel has come in the top 3. Even I think one year it was at number 1, which is crazy, but completely understandable. Okay, we get that. CRMs are an investment, especially for smaller firms. Excel provides a nice, even though it's not meant for that, it provides a good way to, at least initially, keep track, and it's better than nothing. But again, it's about scale. And ultimately, you are going to need some kind of a CRM. But as I mentioned earlier in that blog post I wrote about never finding the perfect one, you got to do it, and you got to go in and do your homework, but pick out those pieces that you need to use and not worry about the robustness of the system and that, gosh, maybe I'm not using it all. You'll get there, but it's all about baby steps, right? And it's about consistency. So a CRM, it's got to be used consistently. It's got to be used proactively. And, it's a simple principle. I mean, using a good CRM provides pretty substantial benefits. And if you can jump in and have someone dedicated to it, ultimately it's a tool that really is, indispensable as far as we're concerned. So we've got prospect, contact, and list building software. And as far as that software goes, ultimately you can see here that over the past 3 years, we wanted to include a deeper look at list building tools for 2 reasons, actually. Now, one is that outside of the content development category, the list building tool category, it's the only one that's posted growth from 15 to 16. Other is that, and we're going to have some fun here, but CRMs, if they're the engine of new business development, then lists are the fuel. They're the backbone of your program. And if they're not clean, it's just like dirty fuel, right? I'm just going to keep going with this awesome analogy here. But in all seriousness, it's a lot of sputtering. It's a lot of false starts. It's a lot of reaching out to prospects who haven't been there. It's wasted time. So really, seeing this number of 48%, we had honestly hoped that more than 48% would have indicated they used, list building tools to help them. So a call out amongst these tools. I mean, the list clearly posted notable gains year over year. Looking at from last year, 58 to 84%. And then in terms of overall effectiveness, they score above average in list building. You look at List, you look at LinkedIn, you look at Access Confidential. I'll tell you something else about lists. Ultimately, it is about accurate and real-time information. I mean, do we need a reminder that we have to have good lists? I'll tell you, a few slides ago, we talked about them being the right fuel. But two things I'll point out to you, because lists, I get, it's another time suck. And quite frankly, it's not very glorious. It's not glorious at all. And we have a team here, again, it's not a plug, but part of what we do for our agency clients, we build very customized and targeted lists. And while they are kind of the unsung heroes, well, that sounds corny, I do mean it. The folks here who build lists for our clients, they do a really good job, and it is not easy work. It can be tedious, sometimes very tough to find these folks. We're building a lot of these lists, the majority of these lists, straight from scratch. So I think ultimately what's tough is doing that internally. We get it, but to think that you can accomplish that task, same as Excel, it's about scale. Through a Google search or through LinkedIn. I know some of you are going to say, actually, Lee, we're doing both those things, and we were able to find folks quite nicely. But I'll tell you, ultimately, you've got to have some kind of a list. And the second point I want to make is you can't just rely on inbound for that. Now, again, I know there's going to be agencies out there right now, maybe on this webinar, who say, wrong. Actually, our inbound program is rich. If we get all our leads from there, or at least the majority, the others are referrals. And it's working out pretty well for us. And that's when I have to shut my mouth. But I will tell you on average, because we talk to agencies every day, it can't work that way. If you have a good, robust inbound program, fantastic. But you've got to couple it with outbound, just like you do generally, because you're going to have to take a heck of a lot of time with those inbound leads. I'm going to talk to an agency last week. Very, very rich inbound program. They're getting thousands of leads a month. But first thing out of their mouth, they said it before I could comment on it, was, yeah, but you know how much time it takes us to, separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will? We've got to decide which of those are qualified and good leads. Then we've got to follow up on them and do all that work. So I think it's all about balance. Ultimately, though, what I would say is if you don't have inbound, you definitely have to either use one of these folks that we've mentioned here, or yes, you can do it internally. But I do think you've got to find someone, and that someone could be junior. That's one of these cases in new business where typically, and we'll talk about this, you don't want a junior person certainly leading the charge there. But in this case, I mean, that is something that you can help a junior person or an intern, be able to understand who it is you're going after and build good qualified lists. So let's talk about other tools. Now, the webinar, we could go on all afternoon, and God forbid I will not do that to you. But I don't want to ignore those other tools. So let's talk about some of those other ones. And again, I do remind you that you can download this at rswus.com. at that resources and surveys tab. But I just love this slide, so I included it. But keep in mind, time is a tool, right? I'm going to try to make the most of yours in the last, 12 minutes here. So look at all the rest of the categories we have. I want to touch on each of these briefly, and we'll talk mostly about effectiveness here. First is email marketing services. I mean, across the entire survey, we had MailChimp. One of the highest marks for effectiveness. Tightly linked as email marketing and marketing automation are. It's going to be interesting to observe how these services evolve over the upcoming year. Then we've got project management. I mean, we've 3 years of surveying on project collaboration tools. We're consistently getting yelled at. That is not a new business tool, people, RSW and Mirren. Well, yes and no. And it's interesting. For all those who said it's not, we have other agencies, and we specifically reached out to a certain group of agencies and said, should we cut this? I mean, and most of them said, you know what, I would keep it, because yes, I mean, typically we're already in a project or we're already in a relationship, and this is something that new business has handed off to us. But we also had plenty who said, you know what, actually, we've got a lot of new business folks that are part of Basecamp, if you will, for example, just because they were number one here, that don't just hand it off and walk away. And that's something to think about. So that's why we continue to include it. And also just because we know that that's a tool that so many agencies use if they don't have something internally. So if nothing else, just wanted to give you a snapshot of folks like Trello who last year were not at number 2. Next, we had SEO tools. A rather consistent theme appearing amongst respondents who designated other as an option. And that theme was another department or an outside consultant handling SEO. I mean, again, we looked at that outsourcing function. I mean, that's good, actually. And I think, if you aren't providing that to a client and can't do it for yourself internally, the one thing we would just say, if you're using any of these, or if you're using an outside consultant specifically, you've got to make sure that they are in full contact with your new business team or person. They can't act independently, or they shouldn't anyway. And then in terms of effectiveness rating, and I got a question there, mentioned give list building to a junior person. What tools should they use? Is that Laura? Yes. Let me get back to you. I mean, I think, part of that answer, no, that's not the answer to the question. So in terms of what tools they should use, let me get back to you, but it would be the same type of tools we use. Part of the answer, and I'll do this quickly, depends on what categories you're going after. But typically what you start with is you're going to have to invest some money, because I would be going against what I just said. If I said they can do it all through Google and LinkedIn. But I think typically what you might start with is your baseline, like Hoover's, Redbooks, things like that. But look, they're not consistently updated or cleaned, but that's a good place to start. From there, you take a step up. And if you're not going to use one of the tools that we mentioned, then what you are going to have to look at is categories where you play and start with things like conferences or things like associations. And then you can go into certain, there's going to be plenty of beyond, similar to associations, where you're going to be able to go in and find category specific trades, or a lot of the blogs you're probably reading now, that are going to drive you back to sources you can use. But Lori, I'm more than happy to flesh out that answer for you, and I can drop you an email. And then yes, Gordon just got online. This will be archived for absolutely. So sorry to jump off there, and we will still be able to stick to about 10 more minutes. But we talked about social media monitoring tools. 70% of respondents indicated they used Hootsuite. Great tool, and you can use multiple platforms all on Hootsuite. I'll tell you, social media monitoring is kind of, I would say, just not empirical evidence, but it's fallen out of favor a bit, and it shouldn't. I mean, I think if you're not using one of these tools, a lot of them are free. Hootsuite is not, although you can have a free trial. But I think it's something where if monitoring of social media is not on your purview or your new business person's purview, it should be, because if nothing else, you're going to get some good content. It's going to help you along those lines. You got to make sure you're following not only your prospects, but follow some of those trades and blogs that are category specific, to where if you're not writing that content, then monitoring of social media is key to be able to pull good articles or pull good facts that you can then send to your prospects to say, look, you're not just a name on a list. This is something I think you're going to get some benefit from, or at the very least, they see that, look, we get it. That takes a little bit of time, but using a tool like one of these is going to cut that time considerably. Research services is odd, because it's whereas I would have thought, because it can be so key to your new business when you're reaching out to prospects and even when you're pitching, it's actually dropped from 40% of respondents indicating they use those tools this year versus 49% in 15. It's a decent drop there, almost 10%. And some of the verbatim comments that we got from agencies and from you all was talking about, look, we need richer, more real-time information about these prospects, and when you have other companies like LinkedIn, where it's free, or maybe you're paying for the premium service, and they're giving you more of that. I think you want to see some of these like Mintel, who's number one, or any of these, they recognize this. And a lot of them, if you haven't, go back and look and do some homework, because ultimately, I think you might be surprised if not at that they have, they being these companies, have done a lot of work towards giving you tools that are going to give you quicker and faster and more up-to-date information. So something to consider there. And then you got, it's something where I grappled with keeping this automation and inbound marketing tools up front in the initial 4. But I'll tell you, because it was the least used, I didn't want to go into too deeply on the webinar here. But inbound, man, that word just gets beat to death, doesn't it? And I mean, it's something that I think a lot of agencies, I know we ourselves have talked it, what we have been doing is inbound for the last 10 years, it just wasn't called that. But I think ultimately that automation needs to be something you consider. It's a category agencies I think are doing better to figure out, does it work for us? And you have whole agencies who've dedicated themselves to nothing but. So obviously there's some effectiveness there. And again, I think a lot of these companies are doing a better job of releasing tools, some that are free, but otherwise trying to help agencies specifically, but also their clients, to be able to understand better how they can use this, where it doesn't seem like it's so much more horsepower than they need. So I think ultimately part of that's, HubSpot being number one, it's interesting how SharpSpring crept up on them, fairly new to the game, and something where it seems like the reason why is that they have, in terms of that effectiveness, someone said they lost me. Am I still here? I'll tell you what, we're definitely getting a new set of something for the next webinar. But we are close to being done, almost done. So ultimately, in terms of our objectives and what we've done here, hopefully we have there, so we're good. Hopefully we've managed to get you these 4 pieces in terms of what was used. I hope it was helpful for you. As more one respondent articulated, though, at the end of the day, success of these tools, the results you achieve, it's on you. That consistency, and I know it's like, yeah, Lee, we know, but it's true. And I think ultimately what we want to leave you with here, what would we recommend, if nothing else? And I've done this before, but I hope you'll find at least a little bit of interest. It maybe not a surprise to you, but a bit different answer than we've given you in the past years. Now, respondents to literally the tools, as you know, Salesforce, LinkedIn, Winmo. Those are the top three that we're going to tell you about and consider as the top. But several we don't want overlooked. And to be fair, there were two I'm going to tell you right now. They weren't on the survey at all. But the first one is people, right? And yes, Lee, we know that. But let me point out a few things that you may have heard from me before, but I must reiterate. Obviously, agency, your new business, creative, whatever personnel that I'm talking about, obviously you want good people, right? But specifically with new business, a couple of things I want to put into place for you, whether it's a team, whether it's a one person. Be careful about a new business director that also has account management responsibilities. I know there's probably some of you here right now that's exactly what you have. And if that's working for you, then again, shut my mouth. But we have seen that more often than not fail because it's just too much to put on one person's plate. Also be careful not to overload them. They are not your savior. And that's what so many agencies hire a new business firm or a new business person. They think that they're going to save us all. You can't have that. You can't have that. They've got to provide results. Oh, absolutely. And they've got to deliver, but you've got to give them some time and give them the support they need. Also, I said it earlier, it can't be a junior person. Okay. A junior person cannot lead that effort. And a lot of times that happens because agencies, God bless you, you're either being cheap or we're not being cheap. This is just what we can afford. And we know that we need someone doing new business. And that's where I can't really fault you, right? And one thing I will say, though, is if you can avoid it, a lot of agencies also feel like, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this person. Yes, they're junior, but it's the same thing as with all our other employees that might be younger or junior. We're going to foster them, nurture them, bring them up within the ranks of the agency. And what better way to do that? But I will tell you, here's the problem with that. Whereas you can do that with all your other personnel, with an agency new business person, you are not a sales training organization. You are a marketing services firm. So while some of you may be very good at that and then be able to nurture that person, most of you can't. And you really have to understand that and look yourself in the mirror and say, I know this to be true. So what you can do, though, is get, and there's been some recent talk about this, and it's not necessarily new, but hire an SDR, a sales development rep. And I hate that term for it because it sounds like they're just a car salesman to me. But what those individuals do, maybe you have a team or you have a new business director, and that new business director is the one maybe answering RFPs or pitching or in those first meetings and carrying it through. But the SDR is actually the upfront, setting the qualified appointments, calling the inbound leads, sharing content ongoing, maybe creating some of these lists. Now, yes, it's a plug. I mean, that's what RSW does. That's why agencies hire us. And I'm not saying that's what you should do. You certainly can, and I'm more than happy to talk to you about it. Wink, wink. But in all seriousness, maybe that's something that will work for your agency. Maybe you have either as a principal, you're doing it, or you have a new business person, but it's very, very difficult. I realize I'm preaching to the choir here, but for you to set the appointments, call the leads, share the content, create the list, you can't do it. Okay, you cannot do that. So maybe that is where you can hire someone a little bit more junior. Ideally, they have some sales experience, but let's be honest, you don't have to pay them as much. Obviously you want fairly, but that's something that maybe is a good consideration for you. Second is website, and we leave that out too often, I think. That's the portal, right? And agencies, God bless you. I think so many of you have gotten better about this. You don't have to do a complete overhaul. You'd like to. I would like to with our site every year, but you don't have to. Just keep it consistent and updated, especially in terms of the work. But I think, too many agencies, and God, this drives me nuts. I can think of two, literally two. I certainly will not name them. That would be horrible. But one of them has had a site still under construction and kind of a cute little cutesy thing that they say. And it's been over a year. That's insane. You cannot have that. So look, I get it because it's, well, do we want our crappy website up or that? Well, honestly, I think the crappy website, because at the very least you can clean it up, change the copy, add some work, but it's something you just can't avoid. So I just, behooves you, please keep your site up to date as best you can. A solid list building tool. And I know we're right at 45 minutes. I'm going to race through it. But look, we've already talked enough about that. Whether you're doing it internally, you hire someone, that's something you got to have in our opinion. And lastly is a good solid CRM. Excel is only going to cut it for so long. Do your homework. There's a lot more out there than you may know if you haven't taken a look in the last 6 months. So covered a lot of ground here. Thank you so much. And I do apologize for the audio, Fritz says. Hopefully it seemed like it went well for the most part, but I apologize for that. Thank you so much for giving me your time. Would love to talk I saw, and there were some other notes I saw that the folks were wanting me to send some things. Absolutely. My email's right here, lee@rswus.com. Please do email me if you have any other questions. Would certainly love for you to subscribe and sign up to our newsletter, which is at the bottom of our homepage. And again, this was a lot of fun. I hope it wasn't boring for you, and would love for you to stick around. We've got some new reports coming out here in the next couple of months, ongoing blog posts, and some of you have thanked me. Thank you all, and have a great rest of the week.